Welcome to the podcasts of DiscoverGreece.com, where we give you all the travel inspiration you need to dream about and plan your next trip to Greece. Our podcasts are designed to add even greater depth and color to your holidays. We explore local traditions and culture, bring museums and archaeological sites to life, and we go to the source of the Mediterranean food and drink we all love so much. Most of all, we look for the stories of the people behind the travel experience. Think of our podcasts as a first glimpse of the memories you'll be taking home when you visit. In this podcast, we delve into the fascinating world of Asclepius, the god of medicine and healing, who he was and how he achieved his extraordinary fame throughout ancient Greece and beyond. A mortal with the gift of healing, destined to acquire divine status. So let's start with who he was. Well, over time, Asclepius became synonymous with religious medicine. He was worshipped at healing centers named after him, the Asclepia, which were found all around ancient Greece. Among the most famous were those in Epidaurus and on the island of Kos, the birthplace of Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine. His fame grew, and as it did, various myths became associated both with his birth and where he was from. It makes sense that many ancient cities claimed to be the birthplace of such an important personality. The most widespread of these myths claimed that Asclepius was the son of the god Apollo and Coronis, a mortal Thessalian princess. He was said to be born in the 13th century BC in Triki, today's Trikala, in the region of Thessaly. Coronis, while pregnant by Apollo, fell in love with the mortal Ischys, and when Apollo found out, he was so enraged that he turned to his twin sister Artemis for revenge. Artemis, the goddess of hunting, obliged by killing Coronis with her arrows. Coronis was put on a funeral pyre, but before her body was consumed by the flames, Apollo saved his unborn child. He gave his son to be brought up by Chiron, the wisest of the half-human, half-horse centaurs living on Mount Pelion. Now, Chiron had many famous students: Achilles, Hercules, Jason, and Theseus, who killed the Minotaur. But for this story, it was Chiron's skill in the art of medicine, and especially his knowledge of medicinal herbs and other therapies, that is important. The young Asclepius grew up, married, and had children, and, after learning from Chiron, became the most famous doctor of his time. His fame grew so much that he was deified, and, in time, some of his children were even worshipped as divine healing entities along with their father. But none of this answers our most important questions. Was he a real person or a god? And if he was human, how did he go from being born immortal to being worshipped as a god? The opinions of ancient historians and writers and modern scientists differ on these questions. The first thing you need to know is that, for the ancients, all diseases had a divine origin and only a god could cure them. So, it makes sense that the need of people to believe in a higher power to explain diseases would naturally lead them to create a deity to complement the work of medicine. So, if Asclepius was immortal, and given his fame and status as the first mortal to heal, it was a perfect case for him to be deified and, in this way, for medicine to acquire a human dimension. This logic was supported by Xenophon, the 5th and 4th century BC philosopher and historian, who presents him as a skilled doctor and as a man, and argues that people deified him as they did every important hero, seeing in him a concentration of all virtues. On top of this, we also have ancient Greek art showing Asclepius at various stages of his life, supporting his existence as a man. By contrast, gods are usually depicted at a single age. On the other hand, writers like Pausanias, Pindar, Galen, and Aristophanes all presented him as a god. This depiction is also reinforced by the symbol of Asclepius, the rod or staff with a coiled snake around it. A rod with a snake wrapped around it? Sound familiar? Well, that's because it's similar to the symbol of medicine and healthcare today. Just as similar symbols appear on ancient artifacts found in Epidaurus, Kos, and even Rome, we find versions of it on the logos of pharmacies and medical companies today. The snake is an ancient symbol with multiple meanings. As an animal, it's bound to the earth, living at the transition point between the upper and lower worlds, between day and night, and even life and death. At the same time, a snake shedding its skin is symbolic of the renewal and rejuvenation sought by the sick. Greek gods who had a connection with the underworld were considered chthonic deities. So, this relationship between Asclepius and the snake raises an interesting question. Was Asclepius also considered a chthonian god? Well, as you're going to hear about a little later on, snakes were part of the process through which Asclepius communicated his treatment to patients in dreams. And we know that oracles with snakes were among the oldest divination practices. So, yes, there is that possibility. The staff, on the other hand, has a human dimension, helping Asclepius and his doctors on their long journeys, gathering herbs and visiting patients. In this way, it was symbolic of the support and relief of sufferers, and the constant readiness of doctors to heal. What we know for certain is that Asclepius was a prominent personality. He was the first doctor whose treatments influenced later generations. With Asclepius, medicine was no longer seen exclusively as divine intervention, but as a human act. And Asclepius was, by many accounts, a master at it. He was so good that he is credited with curing patients on the brink of death and, so mythology tells us, occasionally performing the ultimate miracle and bringing them back to life. Ironically, it was these feats of resurrection that cost him his life. A furious Zeus proclaimed that only a god should have the power to resurrect a human, and he struck Asclepius down with a thunderbolt. Angered by the death of his son, Apollo killed the Cyclops who gave Zeus his thunderbolt, leading to Zeus expelling Apollo from Mount Olympus for 1 year. If, on the other hand, we accept Asclepius as a mortal, we don't, and we may never, know how and where he died. More important to keep in mind is that the fame and cult of Asclepius embodied the need for people to cure diseases that transcended human limits and reason. Through Asclepius, medicine was no longer just divine, but also human in nature. The medical practices of Asclepius, although inextricably linked to religion, created the basis for the art of medicine. In this way, when Hippocrates came onto the scene, it was the legacy of Asclepius that would evolve and lay the foundations of scientific medicine. So, we've seen how the deification of Asclepius led to the creation of sacred places of worship, the Asclepiae, which evolved into fully functional healing centers. More than 300 of these sanctuaries were found all over ancient Greece, each offering a unique blend of spirituality and medicine. The first Asclepion is thought to have been in Triki, where Asclepius was born, in the Thessaly region of Greece. Other notable locations for Asclepiae included Sikiona, an ancient city near today's town of Kiato in Corinth, Tithorea, a town in Phokida on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, Knidos, an ancient Greek town on the coast of Asia Minor opposite the islands of Nisiros and Kos, Athens and Delos, and, of course, the two most famous healing centers in ancient Greece, the Asclepiae of Epidaurus and Kos. Asclepius was even worshipped beyond the borders of the ancient Greek world. leading to the establishment of Asclepius healing temples in the likes of Rome. What they all had in common was their beautiful locations in nature with running water and a healing climate. They were also built somewhere that wasn't too isolated and in plain view, serving as a kind of advertisement to attract more visitors whose contributions benefited the sanctuary financially. Imagine the effect of visiting one of these sanctuaries. They were rooms for the treatment of patients and for doctors to do their research. But there were also theaters and stadiums, as it was believed that the healing of the body was inseparable from the healing of the soul. Exercise to heal the body, and art to heal the soul. But before we get into the details of the treatments, let's take a look at who worked in these sacred hospitals of ancient Greece. At the top of the hierarchy was the high priest, who determined the treatment and performed the surgeries. After this, the main medical staff were known as the Asclepiads, priest-doctors who were responsible for diagnosis and treatment. They were believed to be descendants of Asclepius, learning the art of medicine exclusively from their ancestors. Of course, the likelihood is that, as the years went by, this transmission of knowledge branched out beyond the genealogy of the Asclepiads. The remainder of the staff included the assistant of the high priest, the nurses, the therapists, and finally, the women priests. We're talking about a fully organized sacred healing center. So, what were the actual therapies? There were many stages here, including prayer and religious acts that were inextricably linked to the healing process. But before any of that, there was a process that's no different from today. Cleanliness was considered an essential element in the Asclepius, so all patients entering and staying in a sanctuary would first be cleansed. Beyond cleansing, there followed a general treatment that was common for all patients and focused on the psychosomatic health of the patient, including physical exercise and good nutrition, music and other entertainment, massages, herbal and hydrotherapy, and walks and games. Why all this? Because the ancient Greeks believed that the well-being of the human soul was a precondition for the restoration of the health of the body. It was a holistic and spiritual approach to healing, and a belief that has been passed down through the centuries to the point where we're still investigating the relationship between the body and the soul when it comes to good health. Now, let's get back to the patient experience. At every stage, patients were closely observed by the therapists, who recorded all the information about the patient's symptoms for the diagnosis and therapy, which was based largely on plants and herbs. But there was more to it than that. This is where we talk about the most mysterious part in the process, where religion and medicine became one. The next stage involved the patient praying to Asclepius and performing an animal sacrifice before spending the night in a special dormitory, the abaton, where the process of the engymesis took place. In other words, where the patients went to sleep. The god Asclepius would appear in their dreams, either on his own or with his daughters, or sometimes with his symbol, a snake. It's a fun fact that snakes were apparently introduced to Asclepius as a sacred animal. In the patient's dreams, Asclepius would reveal the necessary therapy or even treat them directly. It was the high priest's role to interpret the dreams after the engymesis and confirm the therapy outlined by Asclepius. The Asclepiads would then record both the illnesses and the therapies in marble inscriptions within the sanctuary. As well as providing a record of illnesses and treatments, these inscriptions also served as a kind of advertisement to future patients. In other words, reminding people of the appearance of Asclepius in patients' dreams and of the successful treatments that followed. Many of these inscriptions have survived to this day. Now, how people saw these dreams is a valid question. Part of the answer might be that people's faith in Asclepius was deep, and so was their need to communicate with him. His very existence gave them the courage to believe in the healing process. So this faith, combined with the belief that the soul dominated the body, gives us an insight into their psychological makeup. Likewise, being in the sanctuaries, interacting with other patients and staff, discussing similar illnesses and remedies, and reading the inscriptions, these would have been other factors that influenced their subconscious and help answer why people saw these dreams. It is also realistic to assume that many symptoms would have disappeared on their own during the days spent at the sanctuary and with the therapeutic nature of sleep on the human body. But what about incurable diseases? The Asclepiads offered two explanations to these, both related to faith and the importance of the soul. One was that Asclepius couldn't alter a fate prescribed by the gods. This was why Zeus struck him down for reviving the dead. The second was that the patient's lack of moral or religious virtue prevented healing. In other words, them not getting better was a form of punishment from the gods for their belief in Asclepius not being strong enough. But if you were cured, you would certainly express your gratitude to the god Asclepius. This was done through a sacrifice at his altar within the sanctuary, as well as leaving a votive offering and, of course, paying a fee for their treatment. But a significant part of the operating costs of an Asclepian was also covered through donations by the rich. In this way, they were healing centers for all social classes, including the poor, far ahead of their time. As we conclude today's podcast, let's reflect on the role of Asclepius in shaping ancient Greek medicine. We've seen how medicine was as much about healing the soul as it was about healing the body, and how religion and science were inseparable. We've explored the life and legacy of Asclepius, a mortal, a god, a doctor, and a worker of miracles, but most of all, as the name behind the world's first healing centers, the Asclepiae, which inspired the work of Hippocrates and gave birth to the ideas behind the modern medicine we enjoy today. Today's journey was brought to you with the support of Ecos Resorts. This is where we say goodbye and hope that you enjoyed this episode of DiscoverGreece.com's podcasts. If you want to hear more stories from around Greece, follow us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. See you soon!